Hello, folks, and welcome to Walking on the Weene Side and It Matters Radio. Today I have with me Larry Fedewa, PhD. Larry got his educational background in philosophy of social science, and then he went on to become an educator. From there, he went on to become an international tech executive in the private sector, and retired, only to find that retirement really didn't fit him all that well, even though he does live on an Arabian horse farm. But he was too interested in the social and political scene, so he started to do a lot of commentaries on politics and society, and he brings with him a little bit different point of view than a lot of our guests, and that's one of the great reasons that I'm delighted to have Larry Fedewa with me today on It Matters Radio and Walking on the Weene Side. Larry, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And one of the things that I'm delighted, and a lot of the stuff that you write, that I've read anyway, has been published in the Washington Times. And unlike the New York Times, which tends to be a bastion of liberal politics, the Washington Times tends to be a little more on the conservative side of things. Is that right?
That's what we hope.
Okay. And so one of the reasons I'm really delighted you're with me today is that you bring a more conservative but reasonable and rational view to the world. So what are some of the things that you're concerned with these days? Let's open it up like that.
Well, basically, I consider the main threat to the United States of America to be a $20 trillion deficit. Mm-hmm. And like any businessman, when you go in to look at an organization, you look at the budget. The first thing you find out is if you're taking in more money than you're spending, and if you're not, you got a problem. And that's the reason that I was interested in Mr. Trump right from the beginning, because he was the only one who seemed to be really concerned about the national debt. So now I'm concerned that he's getting off target. So I believe that the many of the problems that we are facing coming from long-time unemployment, underemployment, very difficult, very many areas in the former Rust Belt, for example. The people have been suffering enormously for a long time, really for 15 or 20 years, and nobody paid any attention to them. You got all the liberals that are going out and saying, well, what the answer to everything is more government. But unfortunately, as I pointed out in one of my columns, profit is the basis for all taxes. You can't have taxes. You can't tax something that's not there. So you've got to have profit, and if you want to have profit, you have to have a thriving economy, and you can't do it with a $20 trillion overhang. So
basically, you're a deficit hawk. That's your strong position. You're a deficit hawk. You want to cut back that government deficit.
Well, but as you know, it's much more complicated than that. My view is that we did an amazing thing by having a competition with the Soviet Union for 50 years, 40 some years, and we ended up winning, and we never had a war. And I think that is an accomplishment that will go down in history as one of the amazing feats of the 20th century.
I have to stop you there. We didn't have a war?
Well, we did not have a war with the Soviet Union. We didn't
fight directly with the Soviet Union or with China, but we fought a number of wars.
We sure did, and that was not that we're certainly not proud of. But anyway, the only way we actually prevailed was by footing the bill for everybody, and the only way that could be done is if we were wealthy and thriving ourselves. And after approximately the 1970s, we were gradually losing our preeminence in the world economy. We were doing a lot of things we just can't afford to do anymore. So that means that in order to attack the national debt, we really have to rethink a lot of our obligations. And this is what the Trump administration was and is still trying to do. But there have to be some other.
So what obligations specifically do you think have been the problem ones?
Well, I think the free nuclear shield that we provided to the entire free world for all those years. And with that, the entire military buildup that we had to support the diplomacy that we were engaging in. And then, of course, once you got the guns and butter of Lyndon Johnson, you started having a spending on both sides of the ledger, and the income started to decrease because of our then the big thing, of course, was globalization in the 90s, and that really knocked the pins out from our economy. So
there are those people who would say, and base it on the economic theory starting with Ricardo, that this globalization actually does good things for our economy. And if you look at the figures from NAFTA, most economists who've looked at NAFTA say, for example, that there has been basically, while we have not gotten the advantages that either Mexico or Canada got, that we have not suffered any loss. It is that we have had redistribution of our jobs and income. That yes, those people, for example, in Ohio and Michigan who have lost jobs, but then there have been jobs picked up in places like Kentucky in the automotive industry, and that there is been a huge increase in the economies here in the Southwest, where I live, for example, as a result, and that you really can't say globalization has had the effect. Now, that's, of course, with the exception of China, where there are issues.
Well, there certainly are advantages to globalization, and particularly to worldwide technologies that have drawn the people of the world, potentially at least, closer together, although that's seen to be threatened right now. But the problem that you're talking about is that those people in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that lost their jobs to the cheaper labor in developing countries, unfortunately, did not. They all they did was suffer. They did not recover. Absolutely. And there was no particular concern about their welfare, and as a result, they got very upset, and they got a chance this last time to do something about it, and they did.
I'm just going to add one little note there, then we're going to take a break. But I wanted to add one note of agreement with you. One of the things that blew my mind was that in the 3 years that she had to prepare her candidacy, where she stopped being Secretary of State and had 3 years to work on her candidacy, Hillary Clinton came up with not one iota of a plan how to help the people on whose votes she relied in the Rust States. And that blew my mind when I realized how ill-prepared she had been to run that campaign. Now, we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. We're talking with Larry Fedewa, PhD, and we're talking about American politics, although you may have just noticed that Larry is also a poet. And as poets, Larry, people like you and me, I think that there's almost like something about writing poetry that makes you aware of politics and social issues, and something about writing about politics and social issues that makes you aware of poetry. What do you think?
I feel like I'm Jekyll and Hyde when I when I approach poetry and politics.
Really? See, to me,
But
it's one and the same.
well, I don't know. I'm a poet only as a very part-time activity, but I have done it basically all my life. Found some poems I wrote when I was 11 years old.
That's about when I started. Okay, so we were talking about the last election, and clearly you felt that Mr. Trump offered some possibilities to restructure the economy and bring back these jobs. Now, I have to ask, as any reasonable person does, what are the jobs that you think can be brought back?
Well, I used to say, and I still think there's something to it. You know, if we said that we will accept any exports from a country that allows us to export a union leader or a union recruiter to that country and guarantees his physical safety, that we should then be able to make some kind of arrangement with them, because the problem is that globalization is great in the sense that we have now almost unlimited, very, very inexpensive labor all throughout the world to do the kind of things that we would like to have done.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that those workers, they enjoy. It's a little bit complicated, because you start off with Japan and they have really cheap workers, and then they grow up and they get better technology and better working conditions, and then they start to have the same kind of labor costs that we do, and then what? Then we move over to Vietnam, and then same thing happens, then India, then the Philippines, and so on. So in a sense, you have a kind of a natural evolution that is occurring throughout the world.
Sure, even in Mexico and China,
wages
are going up.
Yeah, it's a very good example. But in the meantime, we've got our own people who are still facing the initial challenge that we faced with the cheap labor in Japan and 2 generations ago. And so we don't have any way we have not come up with a way to compensate. Now, we have to also admit that a lot of jobs the job itself may disappear, but there's other jobs that open up in technology. I was with Control Data for a number of years, and I started schools in the Philippines exactly for what we're talking about. But the guys back here who could have been receptive to the very same things that we were doing for the Filipinos and for the people in India, they weren't getting that. Their trade schools were dying.
For India. India put, under Nehru, identified education and creating top-tier education is absolutely essential, as did the Chinese. Even under Mao, even when things were really negative, one of the reasons that Mao was willing to open to the door to Nixon was because he didn't want to keep sending his tech students to Moscow, where they were getting second-class educations. He wanted to send them to the West, where they could get top educations. And so now you find, for example, one of the schools I taught at, Northeastern University in Boston, has now got tremendous numbers of Chinese nationals, as does their neighbors MIT and Harvard and Tufts and all those schools. Now, my question...
Had we done the same thing,
yeah.
Then I wouldn't be complaining. And I don't think that we would have had the kind of suffering and human deprivation that we're talking about.
So now this is the thing where I get a little confused in my thinking, because now Bernie Sanders, who is certainly the most left of the major candidates we had in this last election, was coming out for let's provide education free of cost. And we have Donald Trump, who was offering at one point, and I have to add somewhat questionably, a paid education in his own life. And I have to wonder, should we be paying, and you as a conservative, would you agree that the United States should be providing more free or more supported education than we are? Is that something you would agree with?
Well, I came out. In fact, I'm kind of a refuge of the educational establishment in the United States, and I believe, and I've written rather extensively on this, that the only hope for much of the education that we have, particularly in the rural and inner city parts of our country, we simply have to throw the book out and start over. And the only way to do that is by competition. And I believe that's where we start. Now, we have different problems for different segments of the population. The kids in suburbia theoretically are supposedly getting a great education. The trouble is they get done with school and they don't know anything.
Yeah, that's why I went like this.
And so that also requires you cannot build an economy on racial studies, like black studies and Italian studies and whatever. You got to have some real skills that respond to the market. Well, and that's not happening in our higher education either, let alone in our lower education.
I agree that we ought to be providing more skill-based education. One of the things that kills me is that, say, a guy who's, an engineer, say, and he turns into his 60s and it's time for him to retire, and he goes to some high school and says, hey, I'd like to offer a robotics course or something here. You've got the equipment, you got the space, I'd like to do it. Pay me $1 a year for the privilege of doing it, but I'd love to do it. Oh, no, sir, you can't do that. You don't have these education courses.
Well, you're not a member of the union. Yeah, so I like a lot of things. I think the whole educational issue is complex. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to get to the point where we are supplying a valuable education of training. Really, we used to make a distinction between education and training. We need training. We need a lot of training.
Well, we need both things, because we need people to be able to think and reason, but we also need them to have some decent actual skills so that they can do things with their intelligence. And I couldn't agree more with you. And I think the question is, now that I'm going to raise, is should we be paying kids who accomplish in school rather than having them face these huge bills? Okay, now, hey, you're going to go out of college. Well, boy, we'll soak you for tuitions and all of that. Should we be going the other way and starting kids out even in kindergarten and paying kids for actual school accomplishment? And instead of paying people to join the National Guard, should we be paying people for their educational accomplishment, and then in exchange for their education expecting them to serve their country?
Well, yeah, that's. I mean, I think we should try that. I think that's one of the things. But I had, in my checkered past, I was a dean of a college at one time that was having problems, and I instituted something called Earn and Learn, which you at Northeastern were.
Every
One
you had a
guys
1 year of you had to work for a
and,
year.
and so the only difference was that instead of doing it on a semester or a term basis, I had them doing learning in the evening and working for wage in the during the workday. So.
Mhm.
But the thing about that is, if you get into some of these areas that we're talking about, skill training, you can become very expert in far less than 16 years of
Absolutely.
fundamental education.
Can we get back to that in a sec? We're going to just take a quick break, and you're walking on the Weene side.
Memoirs from the Asylum by Kenneth Weene, a novel of emotion, madness, life, and the search for freedom. The nurse with the black hair and the bloodshot eyes had propped Marilyn up that morning. She'd coaxed a few spoons of oatmeal or cream of wheat or whatever down her throat. Marilyn likes to watch the black-haired nurse with the bloodshot eyes feed her. She's so dexterous with the napkin. The drools and dribbles are wiped away before they can stain her bedclothes. It isn't easy being a schizophrenic. It takes effort to stay hidden. If she makes a mistake, even a little one, she will be found out. See how careful the mouse is to stay still? He hopes the cat won't see him hiding there. But if she sees him, he'll jump back inside the hole where she can't follow him. But the cat did catch the mouse. She had seen her eating him, throwing him up and down in the air like a little ball until, tired with her game, she snapped his body apart. The mouse should never have come out of his hole, Marilyn thinks. He should have stayed in there, except when it was rainy or snowy or cloudy or night, or not sunny anyway. That is the best thing of all. It always is. She wonders if she could make a sign warning cats to stay away. Can cats read? That is a question worth pondering. Some of us land in the morgue, some of us land in the asylum, and some of us build our own asylums. It's all the same. It is, in the end, all the same. Memoirs from the Asylum is available in print and Kindle from Amazon.com.
So welcome back, folks. And I'm having a great discussion with my guest and I hope my friend, Larry Fedewa, PhD, and we've been talking about education. And I wanted to talk about my oldest grandchild for a moment. He's not particularly academically oriented. He doesn't like sitting in a class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he's bright. Well, bright enough to figure out what was in his own best interest. Now, he lives in New York, and in New York they have something called BOCES, Board of Cooperative Educational Services, which is usually on a county level. And he's been going to high school, and now he has one course, and he planned it this way. He planned it so that he could have one course left so he could stay in school for a year. Now, he could have taken it in the summer or done something to finesse it. He said, no. He said, that's dumb. He said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the course, and then I'm going to hop on the bus over to the BOCES school, and I can take a course in something I want to take, which in my case is electrical work. He says, I can get a head start on my license to become a licensed electrician. And isn't that a lot smarter than going out and trying to get a job and start out as an electrician with no knowledge and knocking on doors? And I had to say, yeah, it's a lot smarter.
Well, not only that, but if he does decide to go to college, he can pay for it himself.
Yeah, he could. Yeah. So I think that I agree with you wholeheartedly. We should be giving kids opportunities to learn, and we should be making it affordable for them. Now, in his case, as an electrician in New York State, yeah, he could pay for it quite easily by working Saturdays or something. But most kids can't, and you don't earn enough as a barista at Starbucks to pay for a real education. Now, we were talking about education, and I wanted to bring up one last topic in that because you do have a background in tech. What do you think about offering more of our educational system online using things like Skype and sharing like that? So instead of having people in classrooms. Now I know, for example, in Alaska they have been I think it's Alaska, and I believe they've also experimented in Wyoming with this. I'm not sure. What do you think about that idea?
Well, funny you should ask. I pioneered the very first full-scale computer-based education system that was ever fielded, called Plato, and I sold the first contract to Battelle. You probably know about them, Battelle Memorial Institute, and they invented Xerox, and so I've been involved in that question and that issue for a long time. I think that there are a lot of things that computers can do. The main thing computers can do is compute. Mm-hmm. And we're getting now into some artificial intelligence, which I think has to be carefully evaluated before we put it into use for little kids, for example. But as long as computer-based education has a full-scale component, a series of components that do not ignore the interpersonal aspects of learning, very easy to do. Phoenix University, for example, is having a big problem with that. I do think that there can be some very interesting experiments that are actually going on, more at the higher education level, I think, than at the lower education.
Right. Yeah, it's more with adult learning and higher education. Yeah. But I do think in some places it can be augmented. I think, though, that you're absolutely dead on that there has to be a social component, if at all possible. Of course, if you're living in the end of nowhere, Alaska, I mean, your social possibilities are limited to that little town, whereas computers can allow your educational opportunities to be much broader. But,
well, there's an example of that in a little town in Iowa called Harlan, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And my wife is from a neighboring village. And one thing they did way back, probably 15 years ago, they put the entire town on Wi-Fi, and when it first came out, and they have had so much success. I mean, they've got people, they've got big Amazon and big companies coming to that little town. It's not so little anymore
because of the fact of the availability of technology, which brings us back to the economic development topic again, because government can do a lot of things badly. It can also do some things very well.
They can do anything. They can do anything badly.
But they also can do some things very well. And I think that one of the tricks in being a rational conservative is saying not, well, we should do away with all things government, but really to figure out what the proper blend of government and private sectors is. And for example, one of the things that blows my mind is that here in Arizona, for example, if you go out to the San Carlos Apache Reservation or the White Mountain Apache Reservation, you get the latest in quality of installation of computer hardware, the cable systems and things. The next town over, where there is no federal government in doing it, you get terrible. So you get even where people from the town are going in onto the reservation, sitting in the casino coffee shop or something to use the Wi-Fi. And there's something kind of bizarrely wrong about the idea where, to me, I think the government should work at making infrastructure, including educational infrastructure, work in such a way that individuals can optimize their performance in life.
Well, I agree with that, but in theory, but if you went around, and I had some experience in Indian reservations in Wisconsin. If you had gone around to that tribe and asked them if they wanted to have that infrastructure or not, the digital, none of them would have wanted it. They would have just, they would have shrugged at it, say, well, give me my next paycheck or something.
Well, it depends on the tribe, actually, and their attitudes, but certainly in some cases.
What does that lead to, though? What that leads to is the need for people to be evangelists for these various technologies. The government could take the problem, of course, when you get into that. We did that in control data. The problem, of course, very soon is that you find yourself advocating your own products to the exclusion of your competitors' products.
And that's why government has a role too, doesn't it?
So therefore, that is a place where you could have a very constructive role for government, but it should be local government, not federal government.
Folks, we've been talking with Larry Fedewa on Walking on the Weene Side today, and I know that he's piqued my interest. I'm going to ask him to come back for other interviews. But, if you want to learn more of his notions, he does have a website, and I did want to make sure I mentioned it. It's www.mypoliticalinsights.com. And, of course, that's all run together as one word, My Political Insights. And I was just looking at it today, and some of the topics, and one of them is about the tension between President Trump and Pope Francis, which I thought was an interesting topic. And let's see, DC events honoring veterans and those who served, and then some of his poetry too. So, and then, is war with China inevitable? So you can see it's pretty far-ranging as our conversation has been today. And I sure hope that you'll stop by. Again, it's mypoliticalinsights.com and check out Larry's thinking. Larry, thank you so much for walking on the Weene Side today. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion?
Yes, I will get the video fixed, and the next time we'll be able to see me.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, I'm sure folks you've noticed we haven't had video, but we have had a great audio. And Larry, thanks so much for walking on the Weene Side today.
My pleasure.
Our first frontier is gone. Our lands are no longer wild. Our forests and mountains and deserts no longer teased with mystery and challenge. Our lands are tamed and hog-tied with railroads and highways and air lanes, bundled up and ready to be sold, filled with people, plumbing and taming. Our mines are all discovered. Our fields are cities and parking lots. Our rivers are dammed and trees cut. Our next frontier now has come. This is not the challenge of our restless youth. Alas, the newest challenge is in the voting booth, where our people must be saved before we forget our past, before our enemies crush our future into poverty and despair. Our cause is great and grand and godly against evil, against long lines of starving minds and idle hands, of bleeding machines and men dehumanized by greed, but most of all against the godless ones, who smear our clear vision and conquer us with caresses, who also trash our laws, who waste our work, and treat our people like sheep. We must go now while we can still feel, while our long lungs can still tingle with the great air fresh and big from the open sea, while we can still stand and strain and struggle, while our sinew and courage can win and send our enemies slinking home in defeat. But the battle is now. Soon we will be bundled by useless laws and petty powers, tied, held helpless like our tamed land, our fight and our spirit lying in the dust, squeezed out like toothpaste from its tube by the bonds of our land and our enemy's iron fist. Yes, we must go now. Now is our last chance to win, for the battle has nearly been lost already. Our enemies pretend we do not exist. Smug and snobbish in their lofty steeple, they do not believe the real Americans are gathering now to take back our land and our people. Take back our land of the free and our home of the brave. We the Americans who gave our soldiers' lives for law and liberty, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, from sea to shining sea. We are coming, we are near. Our legions will fill the arena, leaving our enemies alone in fear. America's shining city will survive, our jobs and paychecks thrive, and we will keep in sacred trust our liberties and legacies alive. May God bless America, always. Amen.